Prospero stretched and rubbed his eyes. "Another candle!" he yelled. This one was getting low. Gnawing hunger in his stomach kept his eyes from drooping too much, though he was worn out. That and his research. Years upon years in the great libraries of the world, months of translating, and days without food had all led to this very night. He dipped the quill and continued on. He had found them by accident. Hints had led to clues buried in tomes older than the city he ruled, and he plunged headfirst into the search for more. How many books had he bought from unsuspecting nobles? They hadn't known the truth of what they had, and unknowingly let the mysteries of the universe leave their libraries for nothing. He guarded his growing collection, locked away for safekeeping. But after decades of work, he had finally found the key. Inside these pages lay something beyond mathematics or astronomy, beyond alchemy even. Prospero, the Duke of Milan, had discovered magic. The candle was getting low, and Prospero called out for a servant. Probably asleep. Prospero rolled his eyes. It was 3:30 in the morning. What were they doing asleep? He glanced at the candle. About 10 minutes left before it sputtered out. Enough to finish this page. The last page. But he was wrong. It only took him about 5 minutes. And as he sat there, his hands began to shake. Prospero bit his lower lip as tears started pooling in the wrinkled corners of his eyes. He had done it. He had really done it. Just then, the door opened behind him. "About time," he grumbled, looking briefly at the dwindling light. They needed to be quick about it. This one was going to go out. Footsteps sounded behind him, growing closer. A servant was saying something, but he wouldn't let his servant interrupt this That's when he felt arms wrapping around his own, jerking him up from his desk. "My lord, I said you need to go. Now." Prospero spun around, pulled from his thoughts. Gonzalo? What was Gonzalo doing here? He was one of the Duke's oldest friends, an advisor to the King of Naples. Whatever it was, it could wait till morning. There was nothing that was this important. Prospero hadn't even been to a council meeting in years. His research was too important to be interrupted with ruling his ancestral home. He pulled back his arms, straightening his clothes as he sat back down. Or tried to, that is. Gonzalo wouldn't let him. "An army is in the city," Gonzalo explained. The Duke shook his head. What? Well, what was his army doing? Were they going to fight back or something? Gonzalo swallowed hard and nodded. They had. The soldiers that were loyal to their Duke were now dead, and those that remained had declared a new Duke. The guy who'd opened the gates for the army in the first place, actually. Prospero's brother, Antonio. Gonzalo paused. The palace guard was the last holdout, but they, too, would fall to the army of the King of Naples. It was over. Prospero tried to make a break for it, to run to his precious books, but Gonzalo, who hadn't spent the better part of 2 decades buried in dusty tomes, well, he was a lot stronger. He dragged Prospero from the table. There was no time for his books now. They needed to get away. Miranda's nurse was getting her, if that wing of the palace hadn't fallen already. There was a boat waiting for them. Prospero and his daughter would need to get out of Milan, or his brother's men would kill them both. I'm Jason Weiser. From Bardic, this is Fictional. It had been a while since he had run, but Prospero booked it out of there. And the whole time he ran, ducking through alleyways, Prospero only had one thing on his mind. He should have been thinking about his daughter, still half asleep and pressed to his chest. He should have been aware of the battle sounds receding in the distance, of the men who had honored their oaths to him, and who were now dying for him. But he wasn't thinking about any of those things. His only thought was of his books. He had been so close, and it had all been taken away. With burning arms, he laid his daughter down in the getaway boat. Gonzalo had sent his own servants to stock it, while Prospero went to Miranda. The pathetic watercraft was half rotted, but there was no time for alternatives. Screams went up from the palace. The army was getting closer. If they advanced to the docks while he was still here, or if he was within a bow shot, he didn't want to think about the outcome. Bending down, he tucked a blanket around his daughter and stepped shakily aboard himself, after unmooring the boat from the dock. He felt around the dim light for the oars and found provisions Gonzalo had left him: food, water, and Prospero gasped. His books? His books! Prospero took the lantern and read the covers. They were exactly what he needed to continue his work, wherever they landed. He ran his fingertips along the leather and smiled. But that smile faded as he looked up at the dark expanse of the Mediterranean before him. He had no idea where they were going or what they were going to do. Prospero looked back at Milan, his city. It was lost to him now. As he rowed, the lights and shouts of Milan faded, replaced by the glittering stars above and the gentle breathing of his sleeping daughter as they drifted farther and farther into the darkness. Three weeks later, Prospero and Miranda were asleep under the tarp Gonzalo had left them. Despite said tarp, Prospero's skin was red and peeling. Miranda was doing as well as a 2-year-old in that situation could do, and wait, he felt it. And by it, I mean nothing. He threw off the tarp. The boat was no longer rocking, which meant yes. He leapt from the boat that had been their home for nearly a month and splashed down into shallow water. His feet melted slightly into the glorious sand, and he called for Miranda to wake up. They had found an island. They were saved. Except they weren't. They had found an island, yes, but it was deserted. And it wasn't small either. A mountain loomed on the horizon. Their water supply was about 3 days from running out, so that was their first priority. Even after spending half a day hiking around the forests, they couldn't find a source of fresh water. Hunting proved even more difficult. Things just wanted to stay alive for whatever reason. As the last drop trickled from the water skin into Miranda's mouth, Prospero laughed. He had discovered magic, escaped from the city in time with his daughter and his books, and now he was going to die with both of them after miraculously finding a habitable island in the middle of the Mediterranean. Unbelievable. That night, Prospero lashed the boat to a tree, and he and Miranda huddled underneath it on the beach. They were so thirsty, so hungry, and he worried that that night could be their last. The next morning, Prospero felt a nudge. Miranda was 2. Why ask her about the point of waking up at dawn when they honestly might not even survive the week? These past few days, she had woken him up. She was thirsty, but you couldn't explain to a 2-year-old that you don't have any more water when you were surrounded by water. You just had to listen to them cry. He rolled over, away from the poking, but it didn't stop. Finally, he cracked open an eye and saw Miranda still asleep beneath the boat. Okay. His eyes opened wider. Wait, if she was asleep... Prospero rolled and scrambled away from the thing. It cocked its head and studied Prospero with its tiny, yellow eyes. A scaled hand reached out to poke the old duke again, but this time, Prospero batted it away. Its cat-like split jowls grimaced, and it looked down to Prospero's side. Prospero hadn't noticed Miranda waking up, and now she clung to his leg, peeking out from behind his thigh, and the creature's eyes looked on her with a type of hunger. But then, something changed. It snapped out of it, smiling a yellow, sharp-toothed grin, and it lurched over to the tree line. It returned with a few fresh fish and fresh water, nearly spilling out of a deep piece of wood. The stunned Prospero managed a quick but sincere thank you, and as they drank, the creature crunched on raw fish, bones and all. Prospero and Miranda built a fire and cooked theirs. The creature was in awe of them, and the trio sat, smiling. Weeks ago, he had been the Duke of Milan. Now, He was a cap. The sailor faced even more bad news. They were going down. Yeah, the ship was breaking apart. Sebastian and Antonio's faces blanched, and they ducked back inside the cabin. Gonzalo remained standing on the deck. He saw the scene playing out in slow motion. The lightning strike that had snaked down from the clouds that had appeared in an instant above them. And when it hit, everything went black. We'll catch up with Team Prospero in the aftermath of this huge storm, but that will be right after this. I have a Casper mattress, and it's a major problem. You see, they sent us one, and it's seriously the best mattress I've ever slept on. We had to replace every mattress in the house with a Casper because they're so comfortable. When our son moved into a bigger bed, Casper. Guest room, Casper. I am seriously considering buying a Casper dog bed for Abby. See? Major problem. But really, it's a fantastic mattress. The breathable design helps you sleep cool and regulates your body temp throughout the night, whether it's a hot summer or a cool winter. Also, it's delivered to your door in this impressively small box. Plus, with Casper, there's a 100-night, risk-free, sleep-on-it trial, free shipping to the US and Canada, and they have 3 models, the original, the Wave, and the Essential, all perfectly suited to soothe and cradle your natural geometry. You spend a third of your life sleeping. You really should be comfortable. Get $50 towards select mattresses by visiting casper.com/fictional and using fictional at checkout. That's casper.com/fictional, offer code fictional for $50 off your mattress purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Okay, so big surprise. I love books. I'll wait for you to pick your jaw up off the ground. So that's why I'm excited to announce the return of The Great American Read. It's a 7-part TV series and online event that has all of America talking about books. It's simple. PBS has a list of America's 100 best-loved novels, and they need you to help pick number 1. There are too many great books on the list. There are all the books I mentioned last week, plus 1984, The Handmaid's Tale, Pride and Prejudice, The Picture of Dorian Gray, The Sun Also Rises, The Stand, Ready Player One, and so many more. I'm super excited for this event, and I hope you join in, wherever you are. I've already voted, and you should too. Just go to pbs.org, that's pbs.org, check out the awesome book list, and vote for your favorites. Conversations are happening all over using the hashtag GreatReadPBS. Join host Meredith Vieira and some of your favorite authors, celebrities, and athletes for a celebration of reading. Watch The Great American Read this fall, Tuesdays at 8/7 Central. I absolutely will. It's all starting September 11th on your PBS station. Tune in to discover if your favorite novel is voted as America's favorite book. All right, now back to the show. High up on a hill, Prospero, now 12 years older, watched the storm clear away. His storm. A smile spread across his face. The day had come. It had been 12 long years on this desolate rock, but today was the day he settled all of his old debts. "What did you do?" Miranda asked, running to her father as he lowered his staff. "It was a ship, and you sunk it? We could have flagged it down. You could have, with your... that!" She motioned frantically to his staff. Prospero held up a hand. That wasn't something to be concerned about. If she was so worried, she should go look for survivors and... "Caliban!" "I already gathered enough food for today," came the reply. Prospero yelled again. There was other business, slave. Harshly, he told Caliban to get out there and collect wood until his fingers bled, or else Prospero would make them bleed. Caliban grumbled as he left his hut. He didn't get to sleep in the cave anymore. Watching him go, Prospero muttered something and lowered his staff. Caliban's body instantly froze. He rolled his eyes. Prospero walked up to him. He heard what the thing said. Did Caliban want the bees again? Guess Prospero had learned more since the last time they did the bees. He could make it feel as if they were stinging their way out of Caliban, tearing him to pieces bit by bit. But that's all it would be, a feeling, and they could do that every night if they had to. So, did Caliban have anything else to say? Caliban was silent. Good. Now get to work. Prospero watched Caliban pass by the cave. He didn't look at Miranda as he passed. He didn't look at her at all anymore. Not after that day. It had been a calm morning, and Miranda had gone into her father's chamber to get something. All the way, she felt odd, as though someone watched her. There were only 3 people on the island, and she knew every inch of it after spending her childhood there. It was nothing, she kept telling herself. But Miranda couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was off, that someone was following her into the forest. Rifling through her father's things, Miranda jumped as a shadow filled the doorway, then relaxed. Oh, it was just Caliban. She smiled and asked if he'd like to take a walk later. She continued rummaging and almost didn't realize that there hadn't been an answer. Caliban? Miranda looked up in surprise. Caliban was now a few steps closer, and he wasn't the odd, hunched-over little helper she had grown up with. No, now he stood filling the doorway. She met his eyes, and they stared back like the eyes of an animal. He looked her up and down and smirked. What was he? No, she said, and then she yelled it. She screamed it, but he only walked closer. She ran past him, but stopped hard as he grabbed her dress, throwing her backwards into the dark chamber. He slammed the door behind him. From the forest, Prospero had heard the first scream and wasted no time racing toward his chamber. He was there in moments and heard a struggle from behind the door. In a rage, he blew the door off its hinges, and light flooded in on the attack. Immediately, he froze Caliban in place with his magic and breathed. Caliban had forced Miranda down onto the bed, but that was all that happened. Through screams stretching over the next week, Caliban told Prospero the truth. He was going to do it. This island was his, and he would try again, too. Someday, when Prospero was no longer able to defend her, he would use her to populate the island, his island, with Calibans. Today, after Caliban had run off into the forest to gather more wood, Prospero asked his daughter to sit. That ship she had seen? Antonio had been on that ship. She didn't know that name, but it was his brother. He had been second in line. Prospero said his daughter might not believe this, but there was a time when he was too consumed by his research. Miranda thought about her entire childhood, consisting of Dad with his nose in a massive tome. Yeah. It was easier to believe than he might imagine. Prospero had been too consumed by his work, and he hadn't noticed Antonio until it was too late. Well, actually, he didn't notice Antonio at all until he had led an army into the city. He'd obviously paid the right bribes to the right people, and, with the King of Naples backing him, he'd led a successful coup. That was the night Prospero and Miranda escaped. Miranda nodded. Suddenly the shadowy dreams and memories of a palace, of women taking care of her, or anyone other than her father taking care of her, made sense. They were going to a wedding, Prospero said, looking out on the sea. The King's Armada was escorting them, but they saw the ship go down in open water. They're searching, but they won't find anything. They won't find anything because they're all on the island. My island. And they would run the... Wait, what was that? Miranda turned around. They heard footsteps from farther down. Prospero readied his staff, but didn't have time to get Miranda behind him before the young man stumbled through the leaves. He stood, unable to speak. His clothes were soaked through, though it was obvious he had been crying. Still, he bowed low before Miranda, asking if she was a goddess or a maiden. Miranda would have replied with goddess no, maiden yes, but she couldn't speak. She had never seen such a man before. Really, the only men she had ever known were her father and a horrifying fish monster, who was their best friend until he wasn't. Instead, she told him her name was Miranda. The man was stunned. She was not only beautiful, but she spoke the same language as him. He quickly introduced himself as Ferdinand, the highest-ranking man who spoke that language. That's when Prospero stepped in. First, hi, I'm Magic Dad. That's my daughter you're talking to. Also, what would the King of Naples say if he heard you right now? The young man hung his head. The King of Naples was dead. He had been on that ship that sank just now. Ferdinand was thrown overboard in the storm. No one else swam to shore, which meant no one else had survived. So he was now the King of Naples, and If she consented, he wanted to make Miranda his queen. Prospero laughed and pressed the staff to the prince's chest, forcing the man closer and closer to the edge of the cliff. How convenient. The King of Naples was dead, and some sailor's son was now going to call himself by that name to get with Prospero's daughter. That's not true, Ferdinand sputtered. You're right. It's not, because you're not the king, and you're not a sailor's son. I saw the storm, but I didn't see a ship. Nice story, Prospero insisted, narrowing his eyes. He knew who Ferdinand really was. Ferdinand was a spy, sent from his brother to kill Prospero and take his island. Ferdinand's hand flew to his sword. He drew it and pressed it to the old man's neck. Prospero turned to Miranda and muttered, "See?" Confidently, Prospero stepped away, but Ferdinand didn't move. His muscles jerked a half a dozen times, but he couldn't move. He was frozen in place. "Speak," Prospero commanded, and waved his staff. Ferdinand's mouth was suddenly free. He said that he needed to get back to Naples. He didn't care about some rock in the Mediterranean. His father was dead. It was crushing, and he really needed to get home. Not at all reading the room, his eyes shifted to Miranda. She was welcome to come with him and be his queen. Of course they had to find a way off this rock But he didn't get to finish that sentence. Prospero let him go, and he dropped to the ground. Miranda rushed to him, but Prospero hissed for her to leave him alone. "Stand," commanded the former duke, and Ferdinand's eyes widened. He had plans for the boy. Oh, and Ferdinand had seen a fraction of his power. Remember that. Prospero picked up the sword and handed it to the prince. He trusted that the young man wouldn't do anything foolish. Ferdinand struggled to his feet and into Prospero's cave. He didn't know what the sorcerer had in mind, but at the moment, Ferdinand didn't have any other choice. Elsewhere, on the beach, the King of Naples was sound asleep, and Sebastian, his brother, seethed. For someone who narrowly survived a wreck at sea that day, he was pretty angry. Sebastian was the brother of the King of Naples, Alonso, who now slumbered next to him. The old advisor, Gonzalo, was also asleep next to the king and a dozen other courtiers. Antonio, the current Duke of Milan, sat next to Sebastian on the beach. It was who wasn't there that led to an argument. Ferdinand. The king's son and heir had not made it to shore with the rest of them. So the only conclusion was that he had gone down with the wreckage. The king had broken down weeping. Both of his children were now gone. He just married off his daughter to the king of Tunis in northern Africa. Sebastian was disgusted with his brother. Sebastian's niece despised the ugly old king, and now she was his queen on the other side of the world. Sebastian had told the king as much, berating him until the old man couldn't take it and went to sleep. Now, it was just Antonio and Sebastian awake on the sand. Antonio asked who the heir to the kingdom was, now that Ferdinand was dead. Sebastian waved it off. He didn't know. Claribel, the king's daughter? No, Antonio shook his head. She was a woman, and half a world away. No. Antonio paused and asked again, who was the heir to the kingdom, now that Ferdinand was dead? Sebastian sat straight up as Antonio continued. Antonio said he had spent his entire life as a second son, knowing that Prospero, his brother, would always inherit the dukedom. Prospero did, and not only did he not care about Milan, he threw himself into his studies. He ignored his wife, his kingdom, even his own daughter, all for books. Eventually, Sebastian had grown tired of it all, and one night, he took what should have been his all along. A chill trickled down Sebastian's spine. What was Antonio saying? Antonio claimed he was only saying that Sebastian was a great man. Like Milan, Naples deserved a great man as a ruler. Look around. What did he see? The King of Naples and his servants. Antonio remembered the night he became duke. He had once been an equal to his brother's servants. Then, in a mere instant, they had become his servants. All it took was one decisive action. Antonio calmly looked at Sebastian's sword, then over to the King of Naples, slumbering nearby. Sebastian nodded. Antonio grinned, his hand resting on his own hilt. Good then. They would do this together. Silently, Sebastian picked himself up off the sandy beach and stood over his brother. Antonio joined him. Both men drew their swords, raising them high above their heads, and Gonzalo woke with a start. The men's eyes met. Fine then. First the king, then Gonzalo. But the old man howled in terror. It felt like a voice had been whispering in his ear, telling him that if he wanted to keep his life, he needed to wake up. He screamed that the whole group needed to wake up. And, very suddenly, all eyes locked onto Sebastian and Antonio, standing over their king with swords out, ready to attack. Antonio was the first to find his words. Gonzalo heard it. A lion roared, and he and Sebastian took out their swords and ran to the king, to make sure that he was safe. Gonzalo had woken up after they got there. Good thing, too. His terrified screaming likely scared the thing off. Gonzalo narrowed his eyes at the men, realizing the new line of succession for the first time. Yeah, he said, that's exactly what it was. A lion. That meant that they should all draw their swords. For the lions. And they should go. It obviously wasn't safe to rest there. Because of the lions. Besides, if they were alive here, it's possible that the king's son could also be alive somewhere else on the island. Let's go, everyone. For a second, Caliban paused, and his heart sank. He'd been cursing Prospero and Miranda the whole way. He knew the old magician had spies everywhere, spirits in the air that did his bidding. He probably knew about the curses. He would probably hurt Caliban again that night. But then, Caliban gritted his sharp green and yellow teeth. He let a few more curses fly. Most nights, Prospero hurt him anyway. Sometimes he'd be walking home and monsters, things, would materialize from the shadows up ahead. He could see their eyes, and their twisted smiles glowing in the darkness. They would come after him, and they didn't stop beating him until he was unconscious. That night, when he came back late, after having to scoop up the wood in the dark, Prospero would punish him some more. As he slept, adders would slither into his shack and disappear into his blankets. Sometimes they would bite, but most nights they would just snake through his bed, and he would hear them all night long, hissing him to madness. Up ahead, there was a voice. Caliban didn't know what the magician wanted from him this time. He already collected enough wood and other supplies for the day, and then Prospero sent him out again. And now he was punishing Caliban? It was probably one of Prospero's spirits sent to torment him. The creature threw down his armload of wood, dropped to his stomach, and covered himself with his cloak. Ahead, Trinculo walked up the twilight path. He might be the sole survivor of a shipwreck, but he'd found the ship's rum, so it wasn't a completely lost cause. I mean, after all, there were worse places to drink yourself to death than an island in the Mediterranean. Lightning cracked, and, without a second thought, Trinculo dove beneath the cloak, crumpled conveniently in the middle of the road. Maybe it was the alcohol, but Trinculo wasn't nearly as surprised as he should have been, that he was hiding underneath a cloak with a sinister-looking fish monster. Caliban huddled there, trembling, and Trinculo pressed the bottle to his lips, encouraging him to relax. But before Caliban could do so, the pair was interrupted by someone pulling on their legs. Trinculo threw the cloak off in surprise. Stefano! Trinculo stood and hugged his friend. Man, everyone was dead but them, which was pretty cool because they hated those guys. Even better, Trinculo had the rum. It was... Oh, wait. The fish monster had his bottle. Caliban sniffed the bottle, narrowed his eyes, and then took a very, very long swig. Trinculo looked at Stefano. That was a big drink. All right. This weird little fish guy apparently liked to party. Caliban sat back, the liquor already working on his empty stomach. Wow. This was really good magical firewater. These two, they were good gods. Dracula and Stefano looked at each other. Come again? Caliban took another long drink and asked them if they came from the heavens. The pair shrugged. Yeah, sure, why not? And they had plenty more alcohol stashed in the cave. Caliban smiled, already starting to feel it, and said he had to have more of this firewater. It was amazing. With an astoundingly low threshold for godhood, Caliban would now loyally worship these drunk vagrants who lived in a cave with a few barrels of liquor. No questions asked. As the three men danced off into the night toward the liquor-packed cave, Caliban shared between swigs that he could show them all of the island's secrets. He would worship them, but first, they had to do something. There was already a god on this island, a vengeful old man, and they would need to kill him. That's it for this week. Next week we'll pick it back up at Act 3, Scene 1, and conclude the story of the Tempest. All the pieces are in place, and Prospero will move toward his endgame, but some things will happen that will surprise even him. I originally wrote this story when Fictional was going to be a completely different podcast that only adapted plays from Shakespeare. It's been sitting in my draft folder for about 3 years. I ended up completely rewriting it, save about 3 paragraphs that still worked. I'm glad we were able to make it work, though. I really like this story. Today's story was adapted by me, Jason Weiser, from the play The Tempest by William Shakespeare. It was edited and produced by Carissa Weiser. Our theme song is by Breakmaster Cylinder, and there are links to more music in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.